This chamber and the Seanad should be the beating heart of Irish politics. It should be full of rigorous debate. But it's not. It is sometimes, but often it feels to me like something of a sham of democracy, something of an illusion of democracy. We have ministers come in during priority questions or during topical issues, and they'll read the start of their statement, and a member of the opposition will challenge that and make a few points, and the minister will simply read the second part of the statement, regardless of what's been said. And I'm sure that many of the current government deputies found exactly the same thing, the same frustrations when they were in opposition. Ireland is recognised as having the most centralised power, executive power of any Western democracy. That is, we the Oireachtas do not hold our government, our cabinet, to account in the same way that other parliaments do. The extent of the centralised control can be quite shocking. Recently, at the Finance Committee, we were issuing an invitation to Governor Honohan to come in to see us. One of the government deputies wanted to frame the invitation in a particular way. It was no big deal. It was an internal Finance Committee issue. And the whip was applied. Word came from the executive that the invitation had to be written in a certain way. There was a vote called. As it happened, the government deputies didn't get in to the committee room in time, and I had the pleasure, possibly the one pleasure of the one time it'll happen in this entire Dáil, of defeating the government in a vote. But it was symbolic of real control-freakery. The committees are meant to be at least quasi-independent, where opposition TDs, government TDs really can go beyond party lines and really bring everything they have to bear in scrutinising legislation. The Finance Committee is a very important committee, obviously, particularly at the moment, isn't even allowed write the wording in its own invites. It makes a mockery of any independence that Finance Committee could have. In terms of the process, TDs are given almost no notice of legislation. We find out on Thursday what's coming up the following week. Most of us are in the constituencies on the Friday. And the Oireachtas Research Service doesn't get any additional notice either. So it's very difficult to put serious time and energy and scrutiny into upcoming legislation. And the research professionals who are there to help us, of course, don't have the time either. So a lot of the time we don't get debate packs. Now, one of the very worrying things I've noticed as a new TD, coming from a highly quantitative world where things are usually, proven with evidence, backed up with empirical evidence theory and so forth, is a real absence of that here. Now, it may go on at the Cabinet and it may go on in the departments, but as a TD in Dáil Éireann, I don't see it. Regulatory impact analysis is meant to happen for all major legislation, but it doesn't. It didn't happen for the Social Welfare Bill, for example. There was no poverty impact analysis. There was no regulatory impact analysis. There was no gender impact analysis. So, in terms of how many people the various measures were going to put into poverty or at risk of poverty, nobody had worked it out. Nobody knew that. I was describing it as, what does this button do? Policy making, slightly tongue-in-cheek, but it is a very serious implication. In terms of the budgetary process, the OSCE ranks us as second worst in the OSCE. We come 35th out of 36 countries surveyed. On a scoring of the level of data given to Parliament to interrogate a budget, we score 0 out of 10. It's extraordinary that we would score 0 out of 10. And in the time given to Parliament to scrutinise the legislation, to use this data and then come back into the chamber and really try and hold the government to account, we score 0 out of 10. So it's basically impossible to meaningfully hold the Minister for Finance, the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform to account on two of the most important pieces of legislation that come before this House every year. Now, worse than that, when the capital expenditure programme was announced, it was a list. It was just a list of stuff. It didn't say, here's how we arrived at it. It didn't have any technical appendices. It didn't have decision criteria. It just said, here's how we're going to spend over 30 billion euros of borrowed money. Now, in the chamber, I asked the minister if I could have the technical appendix. I said, I can't tell you whether or not I agree with this. I can't tell you whether I agree with the school building versus the road building. Can I have the technical appendix? Can I have the decision criteria? Can I have the cost-benefit analysis? And he said no. He said, you can't. He said, you can go and try and get it from the departments if you like. But, you know, the phrase that he uses is, we were elected to govern. Which, you know, is unhelpful, I would say. The guillotine, Minister, has now been used by this government on 68% of its own legislation. In spite of what is said in the programme for government, in spite of all of the talk of reform and not using statutory instruments, not using the guillotine, nearly 7 out of 10 pieces of legislation that this government has brought forward have used the guillotine. You will have seen 2 weeks ago that the guillotine was used on every single section of the social welfare bill. This is not good. And statutory instruments, again in the programme for government, the intent was to stop using these. Well, on an internet copyright issue, which had a statutory instrument, Minister Sean Sherlock debated with Catherine Murphy, myself and others. For an hour, we submitted a counter proposal. And at the end of the debate, I asked Minister Sherlock if he would take on board a single proposal, a single word, a single letter that had been said during the debate. And he said, I'm not changing anything, and I told you before the debate I wasn't going to change anything. And that, for me, really symbolised a culture whereby people who've been on this side of the House for years, passionate about getting into government and doing the right thing, within a year are saying things like that. It's just an extraordinary symbol of a culture that says this House is not really here to influence the legislation. Obviously, there are notable exceptions, but it's a very serious issue. Now, the issue, of course, is one of the other problems, and this comes down to culture rather than formal rules, is that even if TDs, if we were given the data we needed and we were given time to use it, the problem for opposition and government TDs alike is they pretty much have to say what they're told within reason, but they have to toe the line and they have to vote the line as well. This is really dangerous. An example is the Oireachtas Inquiries referendum. All of the parties canvassed on a yes vote. Now, it was defeated. An awful lot of the deputies I spoke to in this House privately said they were voting against it. And they were telling everyone they knew to vote against it because they had serious concerns about it. Now, I don't mean to bring up whether or not a yes vote or a no vote was correct. But to me, that is an extraordinary failure of us as the people's representatives to give a balanced view to the people. It's a very dangerous manifestation of this strict adherence to the party whip. We've, to me, a ludicrous situation right now with Deputy O'Keefe and the referendum. He has said that he has agreed not to say publicly what he believes to be true, which is a no vote. Now, when that's the case, is it any wonder that nobody trusts us? You know, when a politician says what he believes, he is obliged and told to stay quiet, that he can't say that. You know, how dangerous could it be to Fianna Fáil to have one of its prominent members say, you know what, I respect the party line, I don't agree with it, here's my opinion. I've been in here a long time, I've got a lot of experience, and here's what I believe, you know. I don't know when it became the consensus that parties and the political system as a whole were so allergic to dissent. Now, I hope, I don't know, I've never been to a parliamentary party meeting. I'm sure that there's plenty of good, rigorous debate in them, but it's not reflected publicly. And part of the impact of that is nobody trusts us, you know.